Welcome so much to Civic Education in the AI Age. We are very excited about the discussions we're going to have today. This is part of Civic Learning Week, which, if you don't know, is sponsored by iCivics and the Civics Now Coalition. And we have a really fascinating group of people who are going to talk about the potential that AI has for the civic education space, and also some of the challenges, some of the things that we need to anticipate and deal with as we develop civic education courses, curricula, and strategies. My name is Paul Lekis. I am from the Software and Information Industry Association, and some of you may be wondering why my organization, SIIA, is involved in this, and there are two reasons. One is that we work very deeply on policy that relates to the online information environment, and trust in the information environment is a key issue these days. It's something that's being considered by policymakers across the world. And the other is that we work a lot with education technology companies. Just last fall, we released Principles for AI in Education, which chart a framework for the responsible development and deployment of AI technologies in school environments to further educational objectives. Before we get started with what is going to be a fascinating series of discussions, I want to turn the mic over to Ace Parsi, who is with iCivics, to talk very briefly about a new report that iCivics and the Civics Now Coalition is releasing today.
Thank you so much, Paul. And if it's weird, Paul and I are actually in the same room. So if it looks like he's being ventriloquist, he's not. I am totally speaking for myself. It is a pleasure to be in this conversation. So Paul, Jane, Rashid, and our colleague Ebony Otto from the News Literacy Project, who just went on maternity leave, were part of this working group. And our charge was to really think about having had that experience of the last 20 years with social media and access to technology. How does the emergence of this technology of artificial intelligence not only address our needs in terms of careers and education, but what does it mean in terms of preparing young people to be engaged and informed members of a constitutional democracy? So Michelle will put in the links of the various reports and everything into the thread. We'll talk about a lot of those different things. It's a 10-page report. I really highly urge you not to put it through ChatGPT, but to take time to actually read it. We try to frame the report in a context that it is more timeless, because we know that things are changing. So I'm going to just share one of the collateral from that report. And that is, we were all thinking about, how do we address these issues as they emerge over time, and what are the considerations we have to make? So I want to posit this as a consideration in our work. So one is in the work that we're doing to be really explicit about the ethical considerations, make this a teachable moment when we talk about the ethical considerations of this new technology, that we know that this is going to be changing technology at an exponential rate to keep our conversations very dynamic, that AI can be implemented in a very individualistic way, but we are encouraging more collaborative learning, that we want to be able to give our young people transferable skills to be able to apply the lessons of AI, and that our young people with this technology are going to be producers of media, not just consumers of it. So we need to be able to empower them in that sense, and then use AI to the benefit of creating really high quality assessments and ensuring that we were not just talking about the social studies discipline, but this is going to be interdisciplinary. And so to break our different silos. So I knew that it was coming right before Sal Khan, and I was practicing to see if I could draw like Sal Khan, and I can see that I will not be hired by Khan Academy. So the basic context of what we're going to be coming to is that this is not just a positive, it's not a negative, that it can be both, and that the outcomes of this is going to be decided on our proactive decisions. And ultimately, the question we are seeking to address is, how does this extend and deepen relationships among us so that we're deepening social cohesion rather than fraying it? So with that, I'm looking forward to a really exciting conversation. I will hand the mic back over to Paul and take my really bad drawing off the. off the show.
Well, thank you so much, Ace. And for those online watching, just to note that we are recording today. We will have video of this up later that can be shared. And I hope it is a worthwhile product for people to rely on. On to the next segment of our event. We are very pleased, honored to have Sal Khan today with us. And Sal probably needs no introduction to this group. But I'll give a very short one. He is the CEO of Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit educational organization that offers free lessons in math, science, and the humanities, as well as tools for parents, teachers, and districts. There's a lot more to be said, but Sal, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So the Khan Academy and you individually have been at the forefront of advancing artificial intelligence in education. And when we came up with the idea to hold this event, you were really at the top of our list, not only in STEM fields, and I think that's really interesting. It's something that maybe not everyone realizes, but you've been outspoken about how artificial intelligence can advance learning in the humanities, including in civics. And Khan Academy, through its product Khanmigo, which is being piloted in nearly 50 districts around the country, has been among the leaders in AI-driven educational applications. So cutting right to the chase, how can AI be helpful in teaching constitutional law and other elements of civic education?
Yeah, I think there's at least two layers. Although we could probably brainstorm for 10 minutes and think of a bunch others. You know, we've seen very clear use cases. In fact, this was before we even launched the AI bot that we now have, that it can be an overlay on top of Khan Academy, is called Khanmigo. And I remember sitting next to a student, a high school student. She was in an AP government class, civics, and there was a Supreme Court precedent, and she wanted to know why it was relevant to today. It was, something from 60 years ago. And she just asks Khanmigo. She's like, hey, how is this relevant to me? And it was able to give her as good of an answer as if she had a constitutional, she had a Supreme Court justice sitting next to her, or a clerk for a Supreme Court justice sitting right next to her. And they were able to talk about it, but talk about it in plain language. So once again, it can be an on-demand support right when a student might have let's say, a question. But I think the places where it's really going to shine, and this goes back to the previous point of how can AI actually facilitate more interactions among people, or at least get us back, we're talking about civics, but some of the least civil discourse is happening in civics right now. We have an activity on Khanmigo where you can debate with the AI, and we've actually pre-populated with a bunch of, the top. We don't have the most sensitive issues, but we have a lot of things in there like gun control and whether student debt should be canceled, et cetera, et cetera. And we've gotten very clear and consistent feedback that the students really appreciate what they're describing as a safe environment for them to test their ideas, and to actually take both sides of the argument. I'll say another place where we have a activity called Tutor Me in Humanities, and you can imagine a lot of folks from the press are very skeptical of whether an AI can navigate some of these landmines that have now emerged in especially civics education. And I said, well, don't take my word for it. Let's go to Khanmigo. And the reporter said, okay, take the persona. Let's write as if, we are very pro gun control. And we almost can't understand how anyone cannot be in our point of view. So we go on to Khanmigo and we say, hey, we don't get the Second Amendment. It doesn't make any sense anymore. And what the reporter found very powerful about that, I think if you went into half of classrooms in America, or let's go, if you went to 45% of classrooms in America, you would probably get a response like, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I don't understand what the other half of the country's thinking. And if you went to the other half of the country, like, how dare you say that the Second Amendment is a fundamental right? And it would probably be, I'm guessing, a minority of classrooms where the teacher would have said, well, why do you think that? Let me push you on your thinking. I'm not going to tell you exactly where I am. But that's what Khanmigo did. When we said it, Khanmigo's like, well, before we go into that, why do you think the Second Amendment exists? And we answered, we're like, oh, well, it was right after the Revolutionary War, and, we have militia. And say, okay. But they were like, but yeah, but it shouldn't, but arms then are different than arms now. And they're like, well, before we get to that, why do you think it's persisted? So once again, it's building our critical thinking skills. The last thing I'll mention, and this is an experiment that we're running with we have another sister nonprofit called schoolhouse.world, which is all about giving students free tutoring via Zoom. But we're starting an experiment where we're actually connecting students all over the world on Zoom to have these difficult conversations live with each other. But they're going to get feedback from the AI afterwards to make sure that they were able to maintain civility and how they can
Right.
do that better. And because we're getting huge feedback from colleges, high schools, that they want people to have these conversations, but they
Right.
want to have them in a way that's productive.
That is really fascinating. And just to start with what you just mentioned, I mean, one of the important civic dispositions has to do with how people engage with each other and how we have constructive dialogue. For those who were in Washington today, we just heard from two Supreme Court justices who were talking about exactly that. It sounds like a fascinating tool out there that I'm sure will have a lot of success in the classroom. If I can ask you a little bit more about your civics teaching, how do you ensure, what sort of steps have you built into your AI to ensure that what's coming out the other end is accurate? It's one thing to provide a number of arguments for and against, but it's another to do so in a way that is consistent with, say, where the Constitution is, not only the words of the Constitution, but also as constitutional law has developed through the Supreme Court jurisprudence over the past 200 years.
Yeah, whether it's in civics or other domains, you can imagine it's a priority. And this is where, I mean, there's two things that we've been doing. A lot of prompt engineering, a lot of testing. Red hat testing is what it's called, where you try to get the AI to do incorrect things. And then the other thing is in most cases, it's anchored on content that has already been vetted by the team, by experts on the subject. I will
Right.
say that in this environment, this is probably the space where we have seen, because we're doing some heavy testing, we're seeing the least, the term literally is hallucinations on the part of the AI, where it really
Right.
does seem to be very strong. I guess in the training data itself, it had a lot of access to a lot of content.
Yeah.
And obviously we have many layers on top of that, but
Right.
that's, you prompt, Red Hat testing, et cetera. And I will always emphasize in any AI conversation, the bar should not be perfection. It's probably, you could probably, you could go to Harvard Law School and have a constitutional law professor who's not going to be infallible. They're going to they themselves might make mistakes. The question is this dramatically better than what the student would
Right.
have otherwise? And I think AI is actually already past that bar.
I think it's an important point to make, that AI essentially is a way of, it's making predictions. It is supposed to be biased in certain ways, but we want to limit the number of clear imperfections and the hallucinations, for example. And it's helpful to hear about the steps you take in order to do red teaming or red hat testing, to clean up the data and make sure that the data is of a high enough quality that you're going to limit those imperfections. I think that really helps in the classroom. I know you have a course coming out in September. I believe it's called Constitution 101. You're working with the National Constitution Center. Amazing institution. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is this was with support of the Yas Foundation. We myself and Jeff Rosen, we've collaborated
Yeah.
on many things back in the day. He's the head of the National Constitution Center, and we've wanted to do a deeper civics course for a while. They had already developed the Constitution 101 course, and we said, well, why don't we collaborate and make it into a fully multimodal course with exercises and videos, and now actually you can have the AI supplementing it as well, so that we could teach civics through the lens of the Constitution. And so that is the course that's being launched. And I think what's really exciting about it, above and beyond that it covers all the standards, et cetera, a lot of the video content, a lot of folks associated with videos, most of our resources actually go onto the exercise and all the software side, but the video, we wanted to make this come alive. So we have first-person actors in our democracy. So we have former politicians, some sitting politicians, some celebrities, and we even have everyday Americans, including new Americans. Sometimes people who've just passed the immigration test, they have some of the most appreciation for what the Constitution represents and what America allows in terms of civic discourse. So yeah, we're pretty excited about the course that's launching.
Great. Thank you for that. I don't want to let all of our time pass without asking you about some of the concerns that people have around AI, especially as they relate to the online environment, the information environment, and the potential for AI to generate not just deepfakes, but doing it at scale in a way that really erodes trust. What are your thoughts on that? And what can we do about it?
So it depends what are you talking about, like the AI in kind of a controlled environment in a classroom, or are you talking about AI generally, its impact on civics?
Yeah, I'm talking about more generally and its impact on civics. So there's and some of the things that come out in the report that ACE spoke to, and I think in our panel we're going to discuss this a bit, that there's a view that civic education needs to adapt in some way for the AI age. And we need to adapt, improve potentially how we teach media literacy.
Yeah, that I'm worried about. But with that said, it's not a new phenomenon. I think any of us, I mean, even today, I feel old when I say I'm about to be 50. I'm 48 this year, right? Like I've been around a little while, but even now, as I read different media, different sources, this is before we talk about AI. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I've always taken what this media outlet writes as like the gospel truth.
Yeah.
But now I am sensing a bias that I never fully appreciated before. And this is something that's taken me, decades to appreciate. So I think even before AI, if we really want if we want a healthy democracy, everyone needs to be able to look at sources and have a little bit of grain of salt, a little bit of skepticism. Like, what's the angle? What are they including? What are they not including? What are the financial motivations of that media outlet? How do they make their money? Maybe, what are the other pressures that are being put onto them? How do they want to be relevant? If they wrote this way, will they still get the interviews with the person that they want to interview? So we have to teach people to think about that before we even start talking about AI. What's interesting is I think there's kind of the AI that's coming from let's call it the responsible actors, and the AI that's coming from the not so responsible actors. I think the AI that's coming from the responsible actors, I actually think you're going to get better information from those than you're going to get if you do a random web search, or if you just go onto social media and whatever's being fed to you, because those are almost intentionally triggering, intentionally polarizing, while the good actor AIs tend to be pretty neutral, and obviously if you use Conmigo, it's intentionally Socratic and pushing you on your thinking. But even the Geminis, the ChatGPTs, Bards, Microsoft's Copilot, they're not perfect, and every now and then there's a thing where it explodes because they do the wrong thing. But for the most part, they don't tend to be polarizing. I'm very worried about deep fakes and misinformation. You're going to have people who can essentially create a video of anything, of someone doing anything, a voice recording,
Right.
And we know that, I forgot the old saying, a lie can get around the world by the time the truth is still putting its shoes on, or something like that. And this is going to be even more true with a salacious video. By the time the correction comes around, only 10% of people are going to see it, and so that's even more reason to have some type of awareness and arguably some type of protections in place to see if we can stop the spread of some of these things.
All right, great. I mean, we could go on and on about that. I think your comments are really insightful. I want to highlight a couple of things, and one of them is there are some low-tech solutions that we really need to drill down on, which is critical reading. We look at a source. What is the financial motive? Who is the author? Techniques that were just as relevant before. It's just that we're being inundated with a lot more information. Yet there are some new technologies such as deepfakes, which may warrant additional attention, potentially even a role for policymakers in that space. But really appreciate your comments about different types of engines and responsible actors and so on. And before, I know we don't have much more time with you, and we have a great panel in the wings. Before we let you go, any last words, anything you would like our audience to walk away from this discussion with?
One thing that I've telling myself, even when I get a little bit worried about some of what we just talked about, is like every other technological revolution that has happened before, technology just amplifies human intent. And so whether or not this becomes a positive or negative is really just, is there going to be more energy and intent on the positive side, or is there going to be more energy and intent on the negative side? We know there's going to be energy and intent on the negative side, people who want to spread
Right.
salacious rumors, people who want to manipulate elections, people who want to commit fraud. So that's not a reason to run away from AI. That's a reason for the people with positive intent to engage very deeply with it and to make sure that the positive use cases are not held back. I sometimes worry because there are reasons to be concerned, but if we put too many guardrails on those that have positive intent, they're going to follow the rules because they're good. They're the good actors, while the bad actors are going to ignore it, and then you're going to have an imbalance. And every one of these negative edge cases of misinformation, I can imagine a world where, yes, in a year or two, people, or even now, people can make a video, but I can imagine where you could have a good AI for you that helps you recognize whether something is likely a deep fake or corroborate whether this happened with more legitimate sources. So it can be an arms race. So we just have to make sure we put more energy on the positive.
Great, thank you. Those are great words to leave on. And thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure. And good luck with the rollout of your new course with the National Constitution Center in a couple of months.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to turn over to my colleague, Danny Bounds, who will be moderating a panel of 4 distinguished experts to talk more deeply into the issues of AI in civic education. Danny, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul, Sal, and the rest of the iCivics committee for organizing that amazing and engaging fireside chat related to AI and education. Being a past law student myself, it was cool to kind of geek out about constitutional law. So I loved hearing all of that. But as Paul mentioned, my name is Danny Bounds, and I serve as the counsel for education policy here at SIIA. And I work right alongside Paul on our policy team. And we are so excited to have this esteemed group of panelists for our next session, which will be talking about AI, artificial intelligence, and civic education. So to kick off this panel, I'm very pleased to welcome our distinguished panel of experts. So if you are a panel of expert, if you could please put your screen on. But first we have Mr. Rashid Duroso. He is the Civics Program Director of Democracy Prep Public Schools. We also have Mr. Peter Adams, Senior Vice President of Research and Design News Literacy Project. We have Mr. Ace Parsi, the Director of Coalition Engagement with iCivics, and Ms. Jane Hatterer, the Principal of Digital Media Associate Education Committee, League of Women Voters of the City of New York. So thank you all so much for being here today. And really to kick off this conversation, let's just have a simple question and we'll go in order of those who I just presented. But what does civic education mean to you? And why is it more important than ever? So first we'll start out with Rashid and we'll go down the line.
Civic education is preparing young folks for lives of active engagement in their communities. An idea, a sentiment that Justice Sotomayor expressed that we hold to be true and central to our work at Democracy Prep is that a citizen is not who you are, a citizen is what you do. So to the extent that we can prepare young folks for lives of speaking up, engaging with ideas that are unfamiliar, especially in these times where there's so much polarization, civic education is equipping young folks and adults, but our focus particularly is young folks, equipping them with the skill sets and mindsets and dispositions and behaviors that will allow them to contribute positively to their communities, however they choose to define them. And I think one need not look very far, just on your phone, whatever alerts you're getting from whatever your news source is. Right now, we are at a crossroads in terms of American democracy and our future as a multicultural democracy. So now more than ever, especially as an organization that works with primarily youth from historically underrepresented communities, we just see the imperative work of ensuring that they understand that their voices matter, that their collective voices can affect positive change, and it starts in the classroom.
Thanks so much, Rashid. Next, we'll go with Peter.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Rashid just shared in terms of the definition of civics education. You know, I like to think of it as training for active, engaged, and empowered citizenship, and that involves, you know, not only understanding your rights but your responsibilities as a citizen and in the national conversation, in the national discourse, and also cultivating dispositions and skills and knowledge to have healthy discourse, right? So cultivating a sense of intellectual humility, having a commitment to core values like freedom and equality that may, you know, supersede your own kind of narrow self-interests, and to at least try to understand others, even if you don't agree with them, and also, you know, kind of work toward a shared set of facts, even if we can't agree on, you know, policies to address social problems. I think the erosion of that middle ground has presented a real challenge in recent years, especially.
So much. Ace, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would just build on what my colleagues noted. You know, I've lived in 2 countries in my life, like in a significant period. One was Iran and one was here. Civic education would mean something very different in Iran, right? Like in a democracy, there's nothing that's so guaranteed about living in a democracy. It's a mixture of knowledge, skills, dispositions, behaviors, institutions. And you know, you don't have to teach those skills in an authoritarian regime. Like in a democracy, you have to do what Peter says, right? Like you have to come together with people that disagree with you. That social cohesion is so important because we as a people build this together. So for me, that civic education includes that knowledge, skills, dispositions, and behaviors. And it's particularly important right now because our democracy and our institutions and our communities are getting that sort of pressure test, democratic pressure test, and our young people need the skills, the knowledge, dispositions, and behaviors to be able to navigate that.
Awesome. Jane?
Yeah, I'd like to just build on what Ace said and add another couple of lenses. One is really that we're living in a digital age. So for me, civic education has to prepare people to be informed, engaged, and aware citizens, both in real life and online, and that citizenship is not only local, but it's global as well, and it's virtual and everything in between. And so it's best realized in practice. And I think we have to appreciate the fact that we need in that way to support the development of individual voice and agency. That's part of what I think civic education should do, that it should also impart empathy to support empathy and trust in others. And one of the panels earlier talked about the importance and the alignment of social and emotional learning with civic education. So I think that's why we should start civic education in early childhood, frankly, because I think a lot of those values are established early on. I think civic education is about helping young people think critically, especially about the information they're intaking, and also be able to deliberate. We talked about the deliberative practice, to deliberate with respect and an open mind and appreciation for differences. But ultimately, for me, civic education should foster collaboration with others to strengthen our social cohesion and enable us to kind of collectively solve social problems. So that's my definition, civic education.
Nice, nice. As we can see, it's a wide array on why civic education is important from different perspectives. So Ace, I'll start with you for this next question. So you mentioned knowledge, skills, dispositions, and behaviors, and what some might call the North Star of civic education. These will be familiar in those in the civics community, but perhaps not so much in the artificial intelligence community that might be joining us today. And one of the things that struck me in your new report that you just released in the Uncharted Waters, Education, Democracy, and Social Cohesion in the Age of AI, it looks at the positive and negative effects that AI may potentially have in these 4 areas. So can you speak to this and help set the table for our audience who might not understand why that is interconnected?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's why, to me, the group that we have here, including SIIA, has been so imperative as part of that conversation and leadership. Because part of, when you can see I don't know if you can see it here, but my beard is gray, and so I'm in my 40s. And when I was in school, you had this dial-up internet, right? Like, I'm not even that old, but that's the age that we came from. And so much being able to spread information at scale and those opportunities and how we consume media was very different, right? So now I think that what will change in this environment, particularly in the age of AI, is that you will get some disinformation, but you'll get it with an authoritative voice, and we got to empower our young people to be able to navigate what's real and what's not in that authoritative voice. You will have more opportunities, and I think, when I was growing up, I'm sounding so old with this answer, but when I was growing up, you didn't get to choose your community the way you do now, right? And that when you can choose that in any sort of format, it does have real positive benefits, but it has also challenges in terms of what is community. And these are things that are happening in real time, and we need to make sure that they're integrated in how we educate our young people, so that they can not only get out of school, and I have an 8-year-old right now, third grader. Not only does she get out of school being able to have the skills to do reading and math, but how does she engage meaningfully in a community that she's part of and in the evolving community that we're at right now? So Sal's example of Conmigo is a really good example. Like, you can give that AI a persona and talk to people who might have different views than you. That's a really, really good use of it. But we also have to be mindful of the real opportunities for misinformation at greater scale. We have to be mindful of what does this mean to our individual relationships. So knowledge, skills, dispositions, and behaviors, voting, our institutions, these are all acts of trust, and we have to provide our young people the tools to be able to be good stewards of that trust.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ace. And speaking of young people, we have Rashid on the panel, and you come at the issue of civic education and artificial intelligence from perspective of an educator and an administrator. And for those who don't know about Democracy Prep Public Schools, it's a network of charter schools that is designed to prepare the next generation of change makers. So Rashid, how do you see AI helping and achieving this goal? And in what way is AI going to make it more of maybe a possible challenge?
Thank you for that question, Danny. I want to emphasize that AI is definitely going to have an impact on all of the domains of civic learning that Ace had already mentioned: knowledge, skills, dispositions, behaviors. Specifically with regard to knowledge, I think AI is going to make lessons more interactive and accessible. If you have a student who is an English language learner, having certain aspects of the lesson translated, or making it interactive so that they can ask questions, as Sal had pointed out in some of the conversation about Conmigo. I also think that it's going to be a great place for kids to clarify their arguments, work on expressing themselves a little more clearly, getting that feedback from an AI bot as opposed to a single teacher. Now there are going to be individualized opportunities for kids to get direct and immediate feedback. So I think so far as its impact on the development of civic knowledge, it's going to be remarkable. I also think it presents a lot of low risk situations for students to start working on asking questions, having conversations, workshopping their ideas, especially those who are a little bit hesitant to speak up in class. This creates that space where they can really hone their thinking skills before they practice the soft skills of communicating with folks. So far as concerns, I think it's along the lines of what a lot of folks have already expressed, but the development and adoption of AI can definitely exacerbate some of the mistrust that we're already seeing, whether it's through AI's hallucinations, whether it's through intentionally misleading information being generated and presented to our kids. I also think we need to be mindful of the added necessity of having algorithmic literacy. understanding that algorithms are developed by people and all people have different forms of biases. So how are our kids really learning to navigate information and consume it and dissect it in a way that allows them to arrive at the truth? Even though the term the truth now is so becoming somewhat subjective. I would also say, you know, AI is not going to teach our kids soft skills. So it makes it incredibly important for educators to double down on social emotional learning and making sure that while you're practicing your ideas with a bot, it's very different when you're talking to a human being who now will have an emotional response to the things that you're saying. So ultimately, I would say one of the things is that we need to dispel the misconception that AI is going to absolve educators of a lot of their responsibilities in the classroom. It's actually going to make it necessary for them to double down on soft skills and make sure that our kids are really able to navigate different social contexts and social situations.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that perspective, Rashid. And one thing that you mentioned was just literacy and just understanding AI literacy. And so, Jane, where do we stand on AI literacy? How are we able to educate others? There are a lot of excellent projects underway, like EdSafe, Teach AI, AI for Education, to name a few. But are we actually making that progress, you know, not only for, you know, youth, but just for the general population? Should we be doing more to incorporate civics in these efforts?
Well, I'm glad I got the easy question. But I mean, I just like, you know, I'd like to give a kind of landscape overview because it's very hard for us at this point because we're really in a dynamic kind of exploding patchwork that is rapidly evolving and changing, and it's still even so early stage in terms of AI literacy, and we're already late. So it's difficult, but just to give you a sense of kind of the landscape, we've had policy reports from the U.S. Department of Education Office on Education Technology that addresses the need for knowledge sharing and refining technology plans and policies related to AI. We've had coalitions of broad, you know, band stakeholders who are publishing frameworks. We have principles for the development of AI tools and guidelines for use. We have, as well as providing curated resources, and we have funders providing grants for research and infrastructure development and professional development. We also have early stage legislation. We actually have over 407 apparently bills in the state legislatures that are related to AI. And we have a bipartisan bill that is the AI Literacy Act that was actually introduced by Lisa Blunt Rochester in mid-December that was there to amend an original Equity Act bill and is supposed to facilitate AI opportunities for literacy. On the national front, we also have federal initiatives like the NSF's Educate AI initiative that provides funding for research and professional development and infrastructure for development for all AI-related education at all levels and supports workforce development as well. Vice President Kamala Harris also just announced $200 million in funding for AI initiatives that was supported by multiple foundations. And some of that funding is also supposed to support the protection of democracy in the context of AI. In addition to these early, in addition to state legislation that's in progress, New Jersey was the first state to pass an information literacy bill that mandates that New Jersey Department of Education establishes learning standards for information literacy throughout K-12. And there are many states who have published AI guidelines, including North Carolina, California, Oregon, Washington, and West Virginia, with a lot of other AI initiatives in progress. We have consortia, a mix of public and private organizations, such as teachai.org, which is an international consortia that includes code.org, COSN, ISTE, EdSafe, and PACE, and provides resources, toolkits, policy recommendations to educators, ranging from like basic AI education to AI tools, prompts, libraries, ethics, lesson plans, and sample policies. As we mentioned earlier, SIIA, as part of EdSafe, had put together 7 principles to guide the development of AI. We have library associations. Massachusetts and Maine have published AI guidelines for K-12, higher educators, for administrators, for librarians, along with curated resources. We also have research institutions like Stanford HAI, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Cornell and Penn, Tufts, providing research and resources to the community. We have for-profits. I know this sounds, I'm going on a list, but I'm just saying where we're at. For-profit online companies like Coursera and IBM, who have been providing free courses for educators on AI. And we have places like nonprofits like Common Sense Media and PBS Learning Media, who have also shared and curated hundreds of those AI literacy resources. We have AI tech companies such as Google and Microsoft who are providing toolkits and yet really came to the table quite late relative to other providers. And then you have individual thought leaders like Amanda Bickerstaff and Ethan Mullock, who have provided a whole range of resources, toolkits, done PD on this. And then you also have your lone individual educators. So there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of resources. The question is how they get trickled down, so to speak, to the educators and in the schools. And that's one of the challenges, is that they're out there, the resources are out there, they're beginning to percolate. The coalitions are providing many, many resources, and people like Amanda at AI in Education are also providing wonderful resources. But I think the question is what the culture of and the ecosystem of the state, the schools, the departments of education are to support the implanting, so to speak, of the AI literacy curriculum. Bad choice of words, perhaps, but so, and I do think, to answer your last question, that we should be considering in the context of AI literacy, civic education, and I do think there are alignments which we as a group researched and looked at, but there should be more forethought given to how civic education intersects.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jane. So the general consensus is that it is growing and AI information is spreading. And this is a great time to ask you, Peter, about that spread, and especially generative AI tools. As we know in education, there was first hesitancy about artificial intelligence, where some school districts were like, oh, we're not allowing AI. And then obviously, as all these resources came out and more research came out, it was a little bit more embracing, of artificial intelligence after people realized, okay, we can actually do some good work, like you said, Jane. So for Peter, when it comes to generative AI and the reliability of that information, obviously these tools have offered concerns. They can help generate deep fakes, spread misinformation, raise questions about the validity of news and other information sources. And so you have a lot of experience working with this issue with your work with the News Literacy Project. So how grave is this concern?
I think it's pretty grave. In fact, I think it's kind of hard to overestimate the potential impact that generative AI might have. I think it kind of requires us to update our evidentiary standards and almost introduce a whole new kind of epistemic regime for students, who are going to be grappling with this technology now throughout their lives. A point I often make to audiences is, not just about generative AI, but all of the things in our information environment. We kind of owe students the training on this front, right? I think of the work we do, news literacy, as a student right. They didn't invent these information systems. They didn't invent the backward motivations and incentives of social media platforms and their influence on the national conversation. Our generation oversaw a lot of that. They're just inheriting, a lot of opportunity and a lot of access, but also a lot of mess and pitfalls and difficulty. And I think, so we owe that to them. I think, when it comes to the threats of chatbots and those kinds of generative AI tools, I think it's pretty well documented. I think, Rashid spoke to the tendency for these tools to hallucinate, to give you what they think you want at times. And, they present a real problem, right? Even their developers aren't quite sure why they do the things they do or what they're going to do next, and can't always explain that. We've seen some high-profile instances where legal scholars have used ChatGPT or lawyers have used ChatGPT, and it has hallucinated legal precedents that don't exist, but they've given them a name, and it sounds very convincing. It sounds authoritative. It seems like a standards-based source, because it's often been trained on a standards-based source. But the sourcing can also be fabricated. So they've also hallucinated news reports from known, mainstream outlets. They've hallucinated reports from the New York Times in a citation, but if you go looking for that, it doesn't exist, right? So I think it's really vital that we help students understand what these tools can and can't do, what the stakes are for different scenarios of using them. It's not to say there aren't ways that they can be empowering for young people now, right? Explain this complex concept to me in plain language. Some chatbots are very good at that, but just understanding that there are limitations and pitfalls in the technology, that will no doubt improve. I think AI ethics is a really important area for students to pay attention to. And then on the visual front, image generators and video-based generators are maybe a more urgent concern, especially around civics and the upcoming election. As they approach photorealism, certainly at a glance on social media, they've already achieved that. I think, the fact that anyone can now not just take something out of context, not just doctor an image, not just make an evidence-free assertion and have it get traction online, but actually create, bespoke, made-to-order photos, or what appear to be photos, but aren't, that damage a candidate you disfavor or idealize a candidate you favor. We're already seeing that circulate and get traction online. And my fear with visuals is that, visual misinformation is stickier and more effective than other forms of misinformation. So once you've seen, an idealized image of Biden posing with supposed supporters, or you've seen an idealized image of Biden in military fatigues, looking strong and planning an attack or a counterattack on the Houthis, it's hard to forget. It sticks in your mind. You've seen it, right? And we're hardwired evolutionarily to, believe our senses. You see something, it's real. It seems very real. So I think that's part of the updating we're going to have to do. We're going to have to disrupt some of those intuitive systems that we've relied on, and some of our heuristics and epistemic shortcuts in ways that are really challenging. And at the same time, those tools can be exciting and can be put to good use. I do think, though, to Sal's point earlier, there is an asymmetry there, right? There is a lot of good that AI can do. AI systems can be trained to recognize AI-generated content and detect it, to fight misinformation, all of those things. But accurately describing nuanced, complex social issues is always harder. And the accurate thing is always harder than pushing out a quick and easy lie or a distortive image. So there's an asymmetry there that I think we need to continue to be worried about, that this technology might just supercharge. So.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Peter. And, one thing most of us can say is that we are all adults here, right? And so we understand, or we're gathering information and trying to understand artificial intelligence, right? With everything is new, but obviously for youth, in schools, it's a little bit different. And, just like YouTube was really big and, elections back in 2008 for us, now artificial intelligence will be, for elections and anything related to civics, really for the youth of this generation. And so my question is for Rashid, since you work with youth on the ground, right? Do you see AI having an impact on the core building blocks of civic education, specifically with knowledge, skills, dispositions, and behaviors?
It's interesting because I'm interpreting that question from two lenses. The first is through adopting AI in the classroom, and then the other one is to adapting to AI in the larger social space. And so with regard to the first, I think it's still fairly early on. And so while we've done a lot of internal surveys to just see how staff are implementing AI, we've seen about 60% of surveyed staff members in our network have indicated that at least once a week they're using AI. It's not fundamentally changing the way that they're delivering instruction. I think one thing that we are really mindful of is just ensuring that we're I keep saying doubling down, but I just think it's so important for us to really focus on the foundational skills in the same way that we can give you a calculator, and it doesn't necessarily mean that because you have this tool, you're going to have the necessary skills to be knowledgeable or to, adapt the way that you are interacting with folks. So we still need to focus on the social emotional skills. It's changing in part because of that other element of adapting to AI's presence broadly. But AI itself right now is something that a lot of educators are still kind of figuring out how to incorporate into the classroom. With regard to adapting to AI's general presence, I think it is pushing educators to focus more on how to find reliable sources. A lot of the points that Peter had raised previously, just about becoming media literate as an essential skill that our kids deserve and need, and a right, it is 100% true. And I think of all of the images and folks who are following, the most recent controversy of Princess Catherine's family photo, right? Something as simple as that you would think, oh, it's just a photo of a family, but there is so much of a story behind that, and there are such implications for something so simple. So imagine now coming into an election season, for example, when President Trump was indicted and AI images were generated showing him being carried away by police, right? And as Paul had mentioned, as Peter had mentioned, those pictures circulate so quickly. And educators now need to say, well, yes, that is a picture, but that is not the reality. And it makes it so much harder now because it's almost as though one needs to physically be present to say, I can verify that this actually happened versus this is something that was generated by someone. So I think it's going to make the work of educators so much harder, but at the same time, it is going to unlock new levels of interaction and conversation and really push educators to hone their craft and find ways to express ideas and get kids to challenge them and question everything. And so I think part of it is also teaching our kids to be curious and inquisitive and not necessarily being cynical, but constantly skeptical in a healthy way, to ask, well, how do I know this is true? How do I know this is real? Who created this? So I'll pause there, but I think just to summarize, in the classroom, there's a lot of great potential. We have not yet seen the fundamental building blocks evolving yet. But in terms of our response to some of the things we're seeing outside of the classroom, and we know our kids are bringing the outside world into our classrooms, it means that we also need to be even more effective and efficient in the work that we do.
That is great. That is great. And I really, I like that, y'all are talking about how again, one image can make a huge impact, right? And like Peter said, once it's in the mind, it's there, and so again, using our AI literacy tools, like Jane mentioned, and resources to help educate our educators, right? So then they're well prepared, like you said, Rashid, to address these concerns and address and be on the front line for our youth and schools, and especially in the civil discourse that goes on currently right now. So how about this? We have another question, and I'll ask this for all the panelists. So what does AI mean for democracy and social cohesion? And so I'll start with Jane. What do you think AI means for democracy or social cohesion, especially when it comes to young people?
Well, I think it can really support social cohesion in the sense that it can enable young people to put themselves in the place of others. Some of the early applications of simulations where you can prompt an AI tool to assume different historical figures with different perspectives. I think that's a way in which it can enable young people to essentially appreciate differences amongst themselves. There are a whole group of new generative technologies that are coming on to the scene that will actually support deliberation amongst many people, actually, and kind of problem solving by collectives that also can promote democratic action. I think there obviously, part of the problem is that we can't solve fundamental cultural divides just with a tool. I think we have to understand the limitations of technology that reflects the culture, kind of what Sal was talking about, that some of the issues we're addressing are deep-rooted and deep-seated. I think the ability that AI gives young people to learn about more subjects from more perspectives and also democratizes education. There's people with all types of challenges, non-English language learners can get access to information that they could not have before, or actually major pieces of data on issues that they may care about. So there are a lot of ways in which AI can support understanding of differences, and that will promote cohesion, and also sometimes polarize. And that's one of the negative impacts of AI, is it just can amplify the polarization. But there is why it's so important that it's so important that we have AI and media literacy. Understanding that the technology might not be there at this moment to always be able to discern deep fakes and images that are not real. But if we support critical thinking, we support the understanding of where the sources of information comes from. If we support skills that support deliberative practices that are respectful, we can counter some of the negative aspects because we can't ignore it. It's here. AI is here. It's impacting our lives. And our young people have to be ready, and not only for their education, but also to enter the workforce. So those are some of my thoughts on AI and democracy.
Thanks so much, Jane. So Ace, what about you? What does AI mean for democracy and social cohesion, particularly with young people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my honest answer is we don't know, right? This is a new technology. I mean, just to take it, like Danny and I, you and I email back and forth. At some stage, if all your emails to me are coming from your artificial intelligence, and what will that mean for our relationship? So like there's some things that are direct. We can see misinformation and disinformation, but there's also other things in terms of social cohesion that we can't anticipate. And so I would go back, I think, to Sal's point, and what we had in the report is that it can do either. And we really have to be intentional and proactive about the good stuff. So, Cognigo is great. My daughter, read a book about, the Oregon Trail, and she taught, like, had an AI bot and talked to that individual. I think that those types of things are great, but we also have to be mindful of the scale of this and really have like a dynamic conversation. And I think that is the thing that brings, if I have fear that that's the part of it, is that our system of education is always not set up to be a dynamic of having these sorts of conversations and adjusting. And right now we really need it to. And so often right now in our society, we're kind of like, I love the SIIA members, but some of us, when we don't understand technology conceptually, we leave it to technology firms to be able to do this. And I think we as active citizens need to be deeply engaged in this conversation. And young people, especially, because young people are inheriting that the decisions that are being made about AI today will have enormous implications for young people's future. So I think this is a time for providers, policymakers, young people, educators to really have some challenging conversations about the world that we want to live in and come together around those conversations and take proactive positions.
Awesome, awesome. How about you, Rashid? What does AI mean for democracy and social cohesion, especially with the young people that you interact with every day?
Yeah, I would say that both Jane and Ace, gave really comprehensive responses. And I think what I would add is that AI can serve as a tool to boost young people's confidence expressing themselves, which I think can create uncomfortable but brave spaces for them to have necessary conversations. I think if they can rehearse what they'd like to say, they can polish their positions and then come together and have really well-informed, well-formulated deliberations or debates or just general conversations. I think it can be a remarkable tool for ensuring that more voices are added into classroom discourse. I think obviously, depending on what form of AI tool young people are using, whether it's a Conmigo, a ChatGPT, or a Grok, I think there are different levels of bias or different forms of information that can shape the way that they're choosing to express themselves and the ideas that they're going to connect with. And so I also think that it is going to pose a challenge for educators to try and bring all of these different ideas in conversation with one another in spaces that are still emotionally safe for growth and engagement, not only with the kids, but even as educators, speaking to each other, speaking to parents, speaking to families, and the kids themselves. The information now is just so subjective that I think it is going to be very difficult to have a cohesive community, but not impossible. But as I think the through line for a lot of what I've said is just, it is going to require more work in the human elements of what we're doing with AI. So all of the social skills, all of the soft skills, those become so much more important specifically for civic education. Civics is ultimately about being a human being, interacting with other human beings and trying to make sense and meaning and purpose. So I would probably leave with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And what about you, Peter? What does AI mean for democracy and social cohesion?
Yeah, I think it totally depends. I would second, a lot of what Rashid had to say about, teaching, the importance of teaching students how algorithms work, right? I think there's a temptation to think that algorithmic outputs are objective, but, algorithms are created for a purpose. They have training data that it itself is not objective. And so I think that's just really important for students to understand how that works. I don't think we've caught up to search and suggestion algorithms and how they shape what we see, how they shape our interests, the kinds of cycles that can emerge out of that dynamic. And I'm not sure young people quite understand all of that, right? The algorithms that curate so much of what they see online on TikTok or on Instagram, what makes those services free, what the business model is, what the algorithms are optimized for on those platforms. I think are things that they need to really reflect on. Obviously, the technology itself has tremendous, upside and opportunity, but I would say that there is also the potential downside that we need to really take some lessons from, the kind of algorithmic sorting that we've seen on social media, the exacerbation of polarization, real polarization, but also the perception of polarization. So I think false polarization is also on the rise. Like Democrats see caricatures of Republicans and Republicans see caricatures of Democrats. And so we are drifting further apart, but not as further apart as you might think, given the pictures that emerge on social media. And so for me, I agree, obviously, that we need to teach students to be skeptical, but I would say not equally skeptical of everything they encounter, right? They're much more likely to encounter an algorithmically produced image passed off as real on social media from someone they don't know, versus in a standards-based news organization that has standards to verify information, before they print it. So, the AP, and Kate Middleton's a great example, right? They've retracted the photo 2 days after they published it. It got by them. They didn't realize it had been edited. That violates their policies. So there is that strict sort of standard there. And I think this technology may give us a renewed appreciation for standards-based information and processes of verification and gatekeepers and the role they play. However imperfect, it is, I think, maybe more relevant than ever.
Awesome. I really appreciate that and all of your responses to that question. So as we are closing, I just wanted to again thank you all for coming. I have way more questions, as y'all know, to ask, but obviously this is a timed event, so I want to be respectful of our participants' time today. But I will put an applause emoji from my screen for everybody participating. So thank you so much for our panelists. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Paul and Ace. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much. I cannot top what Danny just did, or what our spectacular panel just provided in terms of information. That was really informative. The one thing I want to say is that this is a discussion that is ongoing. This is going to continue. There's going to be more events. I do want to call attention to an event on March 26th that will feature Ace Parsi as well as Amanda from AI for Education. It's going to be fantastic. And also, April 19th is National AI Literacy Day. There's going to be a lot of programming in Washington and around the country on that day, really trying to kick off education in a number of areas, including technical skills, but also some of the softer skills that we talked about today that are becoming even more essential in the AI age. So thank you to all the participants, all the partner organizations. We hope this was informative. And I know on behalf of everybody, we'd love to hear from you and love to engage with you and take the discussion further. Thank you.